Hi and hello. This is a presentation of the Interoperability and Cross-Border Compliance asset produced as part of the Cybersecurity for Europe project. In a previous video we have shown the GDPR side of this asset, but here we will present the eIDAS related interoperability and cross-border compliance issues we have identified in our research. eIDAS regulation manages electronic identification and trust services for electronic transactions in the European single market. Since its enforcement in mid-2016, some shortcomings of the regulation have become noticeable and the EU is currently working on its amendment. In this asset, we look for eIDAS issues primarily related to interoperability and cross-border compliance. The research was done on a specific sample of selected eIDAS implementations and cross-border use cases. The completed asset is available as deliverable D3.18 on the project's website under Publications. The results of this asset have highlighted 7 areas that we think could be problematic given the current regulation and its implementations. First is organizational independence between supervisory authorities and service providers. We have noticed a pattern where supervisory authorities are providing trust services at the same time as supervising their operation. This is contradictory to good practices and could affect the impartiality and independence, at least in appearance, of these organizations and their services. These arrangements could also affect the competition in the market, as the supervisory authority is at the same time providing services and defining the legislation surrounding them, or even regulating access to the eIDAS network. The second potential point of contention is remote access to banking services across borders. This was one of the main selling points of the eIDAS when it was first being set up. However, because banking is so heavily regulated and each country has its own specific legislation, we have observed very different processes and requirements for opening banking accounts remotely in different member states. The third potentially problematic situation we have observed is related to remote video identification. It is possible for a citizen of one member state to obtain digital identity using remote video identification in a different member state and later use that identification even in its own country. However, the requirements for remote video identification seem to significantly differ between the EU member states. This could lead to different levels of trust in the obtained proof of identity and consequent difficulties in their cross-border recognition. The fourth point is concerned with the use of electronic signatures in public administration. There is little convergence in understanding what levels of assurance should be used in specific use cases. This can be confusing for businesses as they try to understand what level of assurance they need. Additionally, the surveyed countries support different authentication methods with no clear indication that the highest assurance level electronic signatures are preferred or promoted. Commercial services that require or want higher levels of assurance are therefore left alone to promote the use of higher assurance level technologies with the citizens. On the other hand, we have noted that the recent EU digital COVID certificate implementations were very consistent across the member states, with the same minimum required assurance level to access the digital certificate. The fifth point of comparison between the EU member states is the commercial access to the eIDAS network. Each state decides if they want to provide the eIDAS network to the private sector, resulting in differences in markets. However, some member states also provide access to foreign entities. This will give companies options to choose and competition will start to build. That will put pressure on the public providers to stay competitive, or local nodes may start to lose interest. If there is too much open competition between trusted service providers in different member states, that may have a direct effect on the security of the network. Member states with lower security requirements will have a competitive advantage because higher security incurs cost. Consequently, care has to be put into requiring the same basic security requirements in all member states. The sixth potentially problematic situation we have identified is the use of biometrics in authentication mechanisms. This in itself is not an issue, but the convention of using third-party hardware and software, typically in smartphones, could become problematic because there is no certification scheme in place and there are no specific requirements for the use of such devices. Even though these devices directly impact the security of the provided services, the service providers don't have contracts with the biometric security device providers, even though that is, or rather was, necessary when the banks had their own authentication solutions like the security tokens. In the final, seventh point, we combine technical authentication and onboarding security mechanisms and requirements. The authentication mechanisms in the eIDAS network across the member states are using technical solutions with questionable security properties, like SMS one-time passwords or security questions. Considering the stakes at play, it is better to not overlook actual security in favor of ease of use, which, as far as we can tell, is the main reason for the use of the lesser methods. When analyzing security requirements of electronic signatures, it also became evident that eIDAS regulation uses very strict wording regarding capabilities of the qualified electronic signatures, namely that any subsequent change in the data is detectable after signing. Technically speaking, the technology used for creation of electronic signatures does not provide such absolute certainty. To avoid any differences in how courts and different member states may explain and understand these terms, we suggest that the wording be amended in a way that will be more in line with how current technology works. This was a presentation of the eIDAS interoperability research produced as part of the CyberSec for Europe project. We hope you found it interesting. Thank you for watching and goodbye.